Dan, tell us what you want to accomplish in your next term in the Florida legislature that you maybe haven't had a chance to accomplish yet.
Sure, Steve. Well, if I may, real quick, just thank you for doing this. I appreciate it, and thank you for doing it remotely. I actually just drove back probably about 20 minutes ago from the West Coast. I spent basically from Thursday till this morning over there, kind of coordinating supplies and stuff like that. So I appreciate you being willing to take my Zoom from my truck very much, because it's obviously important that we have this conversation. And so, look, Steve, for the last and having seen you multiple times up in Tallahassee and spoken with you over the years on a number of issues, look, this. If I am fortunate to be reelected this November, this will be my 10th year in elected office. Obviously, having started at the Coral Springs City Commission and now being the state representative for Northwest Broward. But the job's not done. What I've been able to do in the last 3 years when it comes to legislation, over 13 pieces of legislation passed, most of them dealing with school safety, child safety, some environmental, electric vehicle, tax cuts for environmentally friendly appliances. The list goes on. Transparency at local governing bodies like special water districts. Which I'm happy to delve into as well. Brought home over $3.3 million in funding, but the job's not done, right? I think there should be a school safety bill every year. And as somebody who's a graduate of Marjory Stoneman Douglas and has worked every single day, candidly, since that shooting to try and prevent something like that from happening again, there's more work to be done. We were fortunate to pass the Parents Need to Know Act. I worked with the Parkland parents on that bill, worked on Alyssa's law and a number of other pieces of legislation, but the job's not done, like I said. And so, and where I kind of see the state today, we have spent so much time in Tallahassee on the culture war issues rather than on the kitchen table issues, right? And the kitchen table issues to me, and I think the 800-pound gorilla in this room is probably the property insurance crisis, the affordable housing crisis, affordability in general, the housing crisis in general. There are so many serious issues, access to healthcare. There are so many serious issues that we haven't really been talking about in Tallahassee, and instead we fight the governor's culture wars. And so my hope is to continue to kind of move the dialogue in the direction that it needs to go, and continue to work on legislation that is important to my community and to this state. And I hope I didn't ramble on too long.
No, okay. We've got a whole bunch of issues I know we all do to want to ask you about, but I think it's appropriate. You're to be commended for spending time over there in Southwest Florida. We'd like you to take a couple of minutes and tell us exactly what you saw and tell us what it was like. Yep.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. So, look, one of the things that I was going to mention today is I've been fortunate to build a lot of relationships with folks on both sides of the aisle from across this state. And so one of my good friends is Adam Botana, State Representative Adam Botana, and his district, Bonita Springs, Fort Myers Beach, Boca Grande, Sanibel Island, Captiva, have taken some of the worst hit, particularly Fort Myers Beach. And I'll tell you guys, look, having lived through numerous hurricanes in my life in South Florida, having been on the city commission during Irma, seeing firsthand what that was like for our side of the coast, I have never seen anything like the destruction at Fort Myers Beach. It's just gone. I was there Thursday night. We delivered about half a pallet of water to one of the council members on the Fort Myers Beach Council. To put it in perspective, he had spent his day, his entire community right there had been decimated. His own home in shambles, had pulled a dead person out of a building earlier that day. I don't say that for the effect. I say that for folks to realize how significant it is. They've actually evacuated Fort Myers Beach entirely because they're still doing the recovery work, the search and rescue, and now turning to recovery work. So when I tell you Thursday night when we got there with whatever it was, I think we brought half a pallet to them that night of water and some other supplies. There's nothing left. And it's unlike anything that I've ever seen, certainly. So in the days since then, I was able to coordinate about 29 pallets of water from some of our partners, Walmart, Amazon. I was able to get a shipment in from Home Depot, able to coordinate a commercial sized generator that's going to be going to the Lee County Public Schools. It's going to go over probably in the next 2 hours or so. So it's being over there and trying to be as helpful as I can. Because look, And a lot of folks that I've talked, some folks that I've talked to have said, well, wait a minute, isn't that what FEMA's doing? And isn't that what the state is doing? Well, yes, and they will get there, right? But the immediate need is not being met because the state, as they should, is focused on search and rescue, recovery, still dealing with flooding issues in Central Florida, right? So to have another set of eyes and ears on the ground, kind of coordinating that operation, I think was helpful. And so it was me, Representative Botana, Representative Tuck, a couple other representatives have come over, both R and D, just to come over. I don't agree with them politically on a lot, right? But the politics doesn't matter, and it shouldn't matter in a situation like Ian.
Okay, all right. Very good. Thanks for telling us that. We saw news accounts that one of your colleagues, Representative Spencer Roach, lost his entire house.
Yeah.
Do you plan to go back there?
I am. I'm planning. So I've got a work trip here in a couple days, and I'm going to go back probably this weekend, bring another whole load. And I think that's the other thing too, right? The immediate response has been pretty swift. It's what happens a week after, what happens 2 weeks after, particularly for folks like Fort Myers Beach, who, they're not even allowed to go to their homes right now. Sanibel Island, you can't get to. We dropped a pallet of water by boat to Sanibel Island. We dropped a pallet of water to Pine Island. Yesterday, we were one of the first groups to be able to get resources out there to those folks because they can't reach the mainland.
As you know, much of the 2022 legislative session was preoccupied with culture war related stuff, issues. And now we're seeing a lot more commentary and an analytical reporting from major news organizations around the country that the legislature has done far too little on property insurance.
Yeah.
So what do you say about that?
I agree with it wholeheartedly. Look, and Steve, you've been around this process a very long time, right? And so if you think about it, when you're in legislative session, you have 60 days plus committee weeks, but the actual 60 days of legislative session to get the stakeholders to a table, to have a serious conversation. When you're talking about serious legislative reform, the way that the process is supposed to work is everybody sits down, all sides of an issue, all stakeholders, the public, everybody sits down and says, this is what we need. Here are the issues. Here are some solutions. And then, it's sausage making, right? And sometimes the sausage tastes better than others. But that bill comes together and you're able to have a constructive conversation on that measure. You're able to hear it in committee, in several different committees. You're able to hear public input. You're able to hear industry input. You're able to take all of that into account. You're able to amend a bill. You're able to do all of those things over the span of 60 days. But instead, we wasted so much time, to your point, on the culture war. I was going to say bullshit. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but on the culture war BS, that we didn't actually do what we were supposed to do on property insurance. We all knew it was an issue, but when the legislature, when the hanky dropped and the legislative session was over, all of a sudden the Republicans said, oh, wait a minute, we're getting serious pushback on not doing anything on insurance reform. Let's do a special session. So look, we do a special session. It costs the taxpayers of Florida upwards of $75,000 per day to have us up there. And we ram something through in 72 hours? Right? That's really had no discussion, no time to be aired out, no time to actually be analyzed and thought about. If you asked anybody on the inside up in Tallahassee, it was all just political. It was, hey, we need to pass something so that come November, we can say we passed something. What they didn't account for was any storm, but certainly something as significant as Ian that I think is going to cripple this state's insurance market.
Okay. I'm going to shift gears. I want to ask you about your race and your opponent. Have there been any opportunities where community groups or anybody has sponsored a forum between you and Jenna Hague?
So there hasn't yet. I know that there is one on the calendar. The League of Women Voters always hosts one, which I've already said I'm participating in. I don't know if I've never met Jenna. She seems nice enough. I don't know her. Everybody's entitled to run for office. But that will be, assuming she accepts that invite, that would be the first opportunity, one, to meet her, but two, to have a community conversation.
And when is that? If you know, do you remember?
I think it's the 18th or 19th of October. I'll double check for you.
Okay. In looking at her campaign website, on there is about a 2-minute video, and I'm paraphrasing what she said, but she says that there's too much corruption in Broward County, and she's running to stop the corruption. I didn't know if you'd seen that. What do you think of that message? What is she referring to? What can the legislature do about it?
Yeah, so the only thing I've seen, so I've seen a part of that video somebody sent to me, and then there's a local Facebook page / blog, the Coral Springs Talk, that interviewed both of us. And I saw the article they put out with her comments yesterday, mostly focused on school board related issues, school choice, education savings accounts. And when it got to the point about corruption, she mentioned the grand jury report, things like that. So I assume that that's the direction she's going in and speaking to. I don't know for sure. Again, I've not met her. And look, Steve, any corruption, public corruption, particularly public corruption at any level, is a bad thing, right? And needs to be rooted out. It's one of the reasons. I'll give you an example, and not so much for corruption, but really for me, it was transparency and accountability. That's why I ran a local bill for all 4 of the water districts, special districts in my area, to go to an actual election, to be elected by the people versus proxy vote of the largest landowner, which is how they've been elected forever, to try and kind of get at some of the issues that folks have been having at the local district level. So yeah, I mean, I support it. I've read portions. I haven't read the entire thing, candidly, the grand jury report. And while I have good personal relationships with a number of the school board members individually, I think the Broward County School Board has had issues for a long time. This isn't the first grand jury report. It probably won't be the last, nor should it be. If there are actual issues, we need to air them out. We need to address them, and we need to fix them to the best of our ability.
Okay, and yes, you're right. Your opponent, Jenna Hague, is on record. She's a very vocal proponent of expanded school choice. Do you support expanded school choice, including the use of public money to amplify and provide more flexibility for parents?
Steve, I think flexibility is one thing. I think when you're doing it to the detriment of the public education system, that's when it goes too far. I have no problem. Look, we have just to step back, being a former Coral Springs City Commissioner, I was the chair of the Coral Springs Charter School, which is a municipally chartered charter school. Right. So, no, I don't think all charter schools are bad. No, I don't think choice is bad, but I think everybody should be on a level playing field. Right. When the requirements are here for public schools and here for charter schools, and the funding is the opposite, that's an issue for me. Right. So I don't have an issue with choice. I don't have an issue with giving students every opportunity that they can to succeed and excel and get an A-rated education in this state, but it shouldn't be at the detriment of traditional public schools, and that's often what it is.
Okay. Dan, Anthony, floor is open.
Dan, obviously the most cataclysmic thing that's happened in the area since you've been at Stoneman Douglas.
Yeah,
I'm wondering your view on whether the killer should receive the death penalty.
Anthony, look, it's a very difficult question, and it's one that I have personally grappled with. It is one that my community grapples with. It is one that the Parkland parents and survivors obviously grapple with, and it's not an easy question. Look, at the end of the day, I support my community. I support the Parkland parents. I support them in their understanding and acceptance of wanting to push for the death penalty. In this case, if there was ever a case that I think warranted it very well may be this one. At least from my estimation, and look, I'm not a criminal law expert. I'm an attorney, but I'm not a criminal attorney. The law is the law, and they've chosen, the prosecutor and with the support of the families, have chosen to pursue the death penalty. And in this particular case, I can't think of one that is a more appropriate fit if it is proven and if it goes through the legal process the way that it needs to. Then I'm going to support my community on this one.
Well, you said may very well be. What is your view?
I struggle with the issue of the death penalty. I do, because look, if if you do something so egregious and so heinous, and I certainly put walking into a school and killing 17 and injuring 17 more in what I believe to be a premeditated fashion, I think that's pretty cold-blooded. And so I take issue with that. But, you know, look, I'm not blind to the fact that there have been issues with the death penalty over the years, not just in this state, but in others. But ultimately, at the end of the day, Anthony, the law is there, the law is on the books. And if they meet all of the statutory requirements and the jury decides to go in that direction based on the evidence and the information that's presented, you know, I'm gonna support that. I'm gonna stand with my community and I'm gonna support that.
Does your struggling with the issue stem from the widely publicized history of problems with application of the death penalty and incorrect death sentences, or is it a different kind of personal moral question about whether it's appropriate?
It's a little of both. It's a little of both. I mean, let's face it, the death penalty is a very serious, probably the most serious act that a government can take, right? It's government sanctioned killing. But you know, look, there are certain crimes, there are certain things that people do that I think in certain cases have risen to that level. But you're right, I take issue with over the years the inappropriate application or the differing application in this state and other states. But again, I mean, ultimately in this case, in this instance, I'm gonna stick with with my community and my family, my families.
Thank you.
Hey, Representative Daley, on property insurance, you wrote in your questionnaire that what was passed during the special session was done to placate the public uproar until after the November election.
Correct.
You also said that we need reforms on how claims can be filed, for what reasons. Insurance providers, there should be a time frame that insurer has to respond and pay viable, legitimate claims. These all sound like ideas that should have already been put in place, but is even that enough given something like Hurricane Ian, given that there are a lot of the major insurers will no longer insure in Florida, and after this we'll probably have even less of them.
Yep.
Is there an open free market solution to homeowners insurance in Florida, or is this simply not something that's a viable private market?
So good question, Daniel. I think ultimately, look, like 99.9% of the legislature, I'm not a property insurance expert, right? I can go off of what I understand to be a lot of the issues from both sides, right? So some of the things that I've included in that questionnaire, some of those are issues that the trial bar has pointed to. That's causing the market to be in the condition that it's in. Some of those are why the insurance industry thinks that the property insurance market is where it's been. I do think, to your point, we need to have a larger, all hands on deck conversation about is this, is a free market system in this instance in Florida still viable? Do we need to have do something else with Citizens? You all know Citizens was supposed to be the insurer of last resort, and we've been ballooning for months, right? Losing, and this is part of, I'll peel back the curtain here a little bit. What was deeply concerning to me was about 4 or 5 months ago, we were still in Tallahassee, and I was talking to a friend of mine who works in the governor's office, and I mentioned the property insurance situation, and I said, hey, like, isn't this an issue? Like, are you guys really kind of cluing in here? We're having insurers that are leaving the state. I think at that point had lost 3 or 4 insurers in the last, whatever it was, month, call it. And they go, well, 3 or 4, it's not that big of a deal. We lose, 10 or 20, within the next month, then yeah, it's a crisis. Well, lo and behold, you didn't have 10 or 20, but you had a significant number more stop providing policies. And then you had something like Ian. So the urgency just wasn't necessarily there. And I'm not looking, this is not all just the governor's office fault, but that's a lot of what the legislature takes their talking points from and their guidance from. And so I don't think that it was a serious enough situation for them to really address it. And so to go back to your original question, I don't know ultimately what the what the fix is, but I think we need to have all stakeholders at the table. And again, kind of to my point to Steve, you got to have a full-length conversation with everybody and work it. Let the legislative process work so we can vet out what is going to work, what is not. So we can talk to the experts that say, hey, look, the way you've been doing it in Florida is no longer viable. Nobody's going to want to come here. Nobody's going to want to insure at all unless they're forced to, right? And so those are all those conversations that have to happen during the course of a regular session, not just shoved through for the publicity.
Okay, thank you.
I've got a question. I want to turn to water for a second, Dan. And as you mentioned, and you filed a lot of legislation on accountability issues involving these unelected drainage districts, water control districts.
Mm-hmm.
There's been a recent, and your district, your legislative district is served by an entity called the North Springs Improvement District, right?
Yep. Yes, sir.
I'm sure you know where I'm going here. The recent news story by the Florida Center for Government Accountability, or if I have that name correct, I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. The chief administrative officer of the North Springs Improvement District collected or made a $240,000 real estate commission on a parcel of land that the agency sold. And the story by the Florida Center indicated that there's a loophole in the ethics laws that special taxing districts are exempt from the conflict provision about doing business with your own agency. Based on your knowledge of this situation, and I've summarized it to a very small degree, but what, if anything, should the legislature do to address what happened at the North Springs Improvement District?
Yeah, look, we're definitely going to be looking at that this next legislative session. I've already talked to Bob, I think who wrote the article you mentioned, pretty extensively. And just to give you the background, right? So I've been running, when I was on the city commission, I had then Representative Kristen Jacobs run the local bills, trying to get these folks to a full actual vote for their boards. So that thing spans, several years. And then once I got to the legislature, she asked if I would take it over. I did. We finally passed it. And long story short, NSID is interesting because they, at the last minute, after killing my bill for the last 2 years, said, okay, Dan Daley's not going anywhere. Let's negotiate with him. Let's work with him, whatever. So return what I did, and this was before any of the stuff you mentioned came to light and the situation with the Heron Bay Golf Course or any of that came to light. I agreed to let them kind of do a more staggered approach. So the CSID, Sunshine Water Control District, and Pine Tree will all be on this November ballot, asking the voters, hey, do you want to go to a full majority vote? I'm confident that those measures will pass. NSID is actually on the 2024 ballot. And after that, it kind of staggers their board so that they're elected. I think it's one board seat every 2 years or something. But it was basically a recognition of the fact that they were willing to work with me. Now, fast forward, and this issue all comes to light. And I'll tell you, and Steve, yes, that kind of loophole is a serious concern. But there's other concerns that I have. I'm a big fan of home rule. I am. And that generally goes to cities and counties being able to make, their local decisions. My concern is when you have these kind of, and I've used the term, and I know they don't like it when I use them, but these kind of fiefdoms who have this opportunity to do things like they've done in NSID, that's problematic. And I don't know that you should have that authority. I'll give you an example. The Coral Springs Improvement District has a close to $20 million budget, and what I would consider to be a non-elected board, right? As far as I'm concerned, they're appointed by the largest landowners in a district. So there is no accountability. There's very limited transparency. If you live in one of these districts, I bet you 90 some odd % of the people that live there, probably higher, don't even know who these board members are. And yet they're using their ratepayer dollars to purchase properties, to fight against my own referendum. Right.
Give us a
those
quick,
are the kind of things that have gone on.
Give us a very quick lesson in basic geography. You've got a Coral Springs City Commission, you've got a Broward County Commission, you've got a Florida legislature.
Yeah.
Why do people in that part of the county need these improvement districts?
Look, I think that goes back to the days when they were just originally developing an area, right? These districts can be helpful, can be useful in rural areas, in undeveloped land, and they've been helpful in kind of getting an area off the ground. And some of them work very well. And to a certain extent, some of these folks, even NSID, CSID, have done good things over the years and may provide quality service. But at what point, right? When one of these districts continues to try and pass a local bill that would exempt them from having to go to the city of Coral Springs and the city of Parkland when they want to build a structure on the site, there's an issue there. You're not a municipality. You don't have the right to just say, hey, I no longer want to follow the local building code or local ordinances. Right? That's kind of the stuff that they've gotten to. They're no longer just providing water and drainage services. And I think that's where you start to have that issue. So you're right. And I'll tell you, when I was sponsoring the local bill, the staff director for the committee came to me and said, Representative Daley, there is a real anti-special district sentiment. This was prior to Disney and the fight over Reedy Creek and all that. He goes, there's a big anti-special district sentiment in this body. I bet you if you amended your bills to do away with these districts, no one would bat an eye. And candidly, from a service perspective, I've already checked years ago with the city of Coral Springs. They could absorb the work. The city of Parkland could likely absorb the work. So I don't know. I don't know ultimately what the long-term, feasibility of some of these districts are. I will tell you that I have a lot of concerns. And I will be, come November, if I'm fortunate to be reelected, I'll keep you guys in tune because there's a couple things that I have coming that I don't think they necessarily expect because I want to make sure that there's a separate set of eyes. I'll put it to you this way. I want to make sure that there's a separate set of eyes taking a look at what some of these local boards, specifically NSID and CSID, have been doing.
Okay. Good to hear. All right. I think I'll pause here. And like I said, I wish your opponent was here, but I want to give you a chance to make sort of a closing wrap-up statement and tell us about the next 2 years. It's we haven't talked about this particularly, but these are frustrating times to be a Democrat in Tallahassee for sure. And none of us knows what's going to happen on November 8th. That's why they have elections, but make a closing statement, talk about your plan going forward, but also, what it's like to be a Democrat in a Republican-dominated House.
Yeah, well, so first and foremost, thank you all for having me, for doing this. I really do appreciate it. I appreciate your time and interest, and the fact that you're willing to dig in on these issues and then present that to the public, because I don't think there's enough of it, candidly, anymore. I'll tell you, Tallahassee is a difficult place. And look, I think you all know I was a legislative aide for then State Representative Ari Porth. So I've been around the legislative process a pretty long time. And other than when they had a supermajority, other than when the Republicans had a supermajority, when Ari was in the House, this is some of the worst that I've seen it, right? Tallahassee has always taken pride in saying, we're not Washington, D.C., we work together, we get things done. And while that's still true to a certain extent, man, I got to tell you, it is a different environment today than it ever was before. It's just gotten very polarizing. It's nasty. It's getting more personal, because in large part, a lot of the legislation that they're pushing on the Republican side, the culture war nonsense, the Stop Woke Act, the Don't Say Gay bill, these are issues that everyday Floridians really aren't paying attention to. They're designed to drum up their base. They're designed to be a distraction. And that's really what they've successfully been. I have prided myself, much like former Representative Ari Porth, much like former Representative Jared Moskowitz, in being able to reach across the aisle and work with folks. But that doesn't just mean that I bend over, backwards and just do whatever they want. I'm happy to stand my ground on issues like, reasonable gun reform, or a woman's right to choose, or, any of those kind of key fundamental issues. But I am also willing to work with them where they're willing to have a serious conversation on issues that matter, like school safety. And so, look, that's what I'm hoping to continue to do. It is not the same environment. It is not a really enjoyable experience. And if you add up, I'll give you an example. If you add up all the time, when you add up committee weeks, special session, and session, last year, we were in Tallahassee for 6 months of the year. 6 months. That's not one, that's not a part-time legislature, but two, that's how much time we waste and yet have very little to really show for it, right? Steve, you remember committee weeks, you used to hear bills, right? You were hearing bills in committee weeks. The process was starting. everybody was actually legislating. Now we watch, this conservative think tank come in and give a presentation, and it's the same one that's given the presentation in the last 4 years, and they just burn time and they use it as an opportunity to fundraise while strangling the legislative process so that you only have those 60 days to operate. It's come down to control, right? That's what Tallahassee is about now. And my hope is that the voters start to really cue in, and key in on that and push back, because that's what you need. You look at, our prospects for November, and I'm hopeful that our candidates can take it all the way and can win. But if that doesn't happen, the Republicans are going to be back to controlling everyone in the cabinet seats and likely potentially having a supermajority in at least the House, if not the Senate. That's not good for Florida. That's not good for anybody, right? I don't care. Take party out of it. Take the R next to their name out of it. No single party should control everything. And that's what you've had in Florida and in Tallahassee for a long time. So my hope, bringing it back to my district, I have been honored to serve the last 9 years, just shy of a decade. This November will be my full decade. I want to continue to do the work for my people, and I hope that they'll give me that opportunity.
Okay. All right, Dan. Thanks for joining us this morning. You've been very busy over there in Southwest Florida, helping friends, helping Floridians recover. So good luck. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it very much.